Montana Territory, 1872. The wind whispered through the pines as if telling secrets only the mountains could understand. Preston Keller sat atop his dun gelding at the ridge overlooking the sprawling valley below, his weathered Stetson pulled low against the setting sun. At 26, his face still held the smoothness of youth, marred only by a thin scar along his jawline and the constant light stubble he could never quite tame. His shoulders, broad beneath his faded blue shirt, carried the invisible weight of a man who had seen too much death for someone so young. "Nothing but trouble follows when you let someone get close, Rusty," he murmured to his horse, patting the animal's neck. "Best a man can hope for out here is staying alive and keeping moving." 3 years riding as a cavalry scout during the war had taught Preston that attachment was a liability. 2 more years drifting as a hired gun had cemented the belief. The frontier was no place for tenderness, only survival and solitude. That was the code that kept him breathing, while so many others had been planted in shallow graves across the territories. What Preston wanted was simple: enough money to buy a small parcel in Oregon Territory, far from anyone who might know his name or the things he'd done. What he needed, though he'd never admit it even to himself in the quietest moments, was something to heal the emptiness that grew wider with each passing season of isolation. Tomorrow he'd ride into Helena, collect payment for delivering a herd of horses to the army outpost, and be on his way. No lingering, no connections, just as it should be. But as twilight deepened across the valley, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Preston studied them with a practiced eye and clicked his tongue. "Storm's coming, boy, let's find some shelter." The path down from the ridge narrowed as he descended, following what appeared to be a seldom-used trail. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Preston urged Rusty into a trot, scanning the darkening landscape for an overhang or abandoned miner's shack, anything to wait out what promised to be a violent spring storm. Lightning split the sky, momentarily illuminating the valley, and in that flash Preston spotted what looked like a break in the tree line ahead. He steered Rusty toward it, hope rising that they might find shelter before the worst hit. What he found instead changed everything. The break in the trees opened to reveal a small, hidden valley, and nestled within it stood a modest ranch. Smoke curled from the chimney of a well-maintained cabin, light glowing warmly from its windows. A small barn stood nearby, and in the pasture beyond, Preston could make out the shapes of cattle huddled together against the coming storm. He hesitated at the edge of the clearing. Strangers weren't always welcome in these remote parts, especially not men who looked like him, trail-worn and armed. But as thunder cracked overhead and the rain began to fall in sheets, Preston knew he had little choice. He approached cautiously, one hand near his colt, the other steady on the reins. 20 yards from the cabin, the door swung open, spilling golden lamplight into the gathering darkness. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, the unmistakable shape of a Winchester rifle in their hands. "State your business or turn around," called a voice, surprisingly, a woman's voice, clear and steady despite the hostility of her words. Preston raised one hand slowly. "Just looking for shelter from the storm, ma'am, nothing more." Lightning flashed again, illuminating them both. In that instant, Preston saw her clearly, young, perhaps 20 or 21, with honey-blonde hair pulled back from a face that even in the harsh light showed remarkable beauty. She wore a simple blue calico dress with a woolen shawl draped around her shoulders, practical clothing that somehow only enhanced her appearance. She studied him for a long moment before lowering the rifle slightly. "Stables around back. You can put your horse there, then come to the porch, not inside, until I decide if you're trouble." Preston nodded, relief flooding through him despite her caution. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." The barn was small but immaculately kept, with 3 stalls, only one occupied by a dappled mare who nickered softly as Preston led Rusty inside. He unsaddled his gelding, rubbed him down with a handful of straw, and made sure both horses had water and feed before gathering his saddlebags and heading back into the downpour. The woman waited on the covered porch, rifle still in hand but resting against her skirt. A lantern hung from a hook, casting her face in warm light. Preston's breath caught involuntarily. Her eyes were a striking green, set in a face of delicate features that nonetheless showed determination and character. Her honey-blonde hair, damp from the rain, curled slightly against her cheeks. "You have a name, stranger?" she asked, her voice carrying easily over the drumming rain. "Preston Keller." He stood at the bottom of the 3 porch steps, rain dripping from his hat brim. "I'm grateful for the shelter, miss." Sarah Gentry, her gaze was appraising, taking in his trail-worn appearance with careful assessment. This is Willow Creek Ranch, my ranch. Preston raised an eyebrow slightly at the emphasis. A woman alone running a ranch, it wasn't unheard of, but it was unusual. You manage this place by yourself. Her chin lifted slightly. I do now, my father passed last winter. Something flickered in her eyes, grief, perhaps, or wariness at revealing too much. Where are you headed, Mr. Keller? Helena delivering horses to the fort. He gestured vaguely northward, then likely on to Oregon territory. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making the porch timbers vibrate. Sarah glanced at the worsening storm, then back at the dripping man before her. She seemed to come to a decision. You can sleep in the barn. I'll bring you some supper once it's ready. She hesitated, then added reluctantly, no sense in you sitting out here getting your death of cold while I eat inside. Preston nodded, understanding her caution. That's more than fair, Miss Gentry. She disappeared inside, returning minutes later with a steaming plate of beans, cornbread, and what smelled like venison stew. She handed it to him along with a tin cup of coffee, then took a seat in a rocking chair several feet away, the Winchester resting across her lap. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the storm raging around them. Finally, Sarah spoke. What were you before you delivered horses, Mr. Keller? The question was direct, and Preston found himself answering honestly, something he rarely did with strangers. Cavalry scout during the war, hired gun after, whatever work kept me moving. She nodded as if confirming something to herself. Thought as much, you have that look about you. What look would that be, he asked, curious despite himself. Like you're always watching the horizon, like you're never planning to stay anywhere long enough to put down roots. She said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. Preston set his empty plate aside. Roots get you killed out here, Miss Gentry. Or worse, they get others killed because of you. Sarah studied him, those green eyes seeming to look straight through his carefully maintained walls. That might be true for some. For others, roots are what keep you alive when everything else is trying to break you. She stood and collected his plate. Barnes got fresh hay in the loft. There's a blanket on the peg by the door. Storm should pass by morning. Before he could thank her, she had disappeared inside, the cabin door closing firmly behind her. Preston heard the unmistakable sound of a bar sliding into place. He made his way to the barn through the rain, her words echoing in his mind. Roots are what keep you alive. He'd spent years believing the opposite, that attachments were weaknesses, entry points for pain. Yet here was this woman, alone in this hidden valley, somehow carving out existence through sheer force of will and determination. Preston settled into the sweet-smelling hay of the loft, wrapped in the borrowed blanket, listening to the storm rage outside and the occasional soft sounds of the horses below. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something stir within him, curiosity perhaps, or something more dangerous. The morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm having washed the world clean. Preston woke early, tended to Rusty, and was preparing to leave when he noticed the broken hinge on the barn door. Without thinking, he fetched tools from his saddlebags and set about fixing it. He was nearly finished when Sarah appeared in the doorway, the morning sunlight setting her hair aglow like spun gold. She wore a simple brown skirt and white blouse, with a leather vest that spoke of practicality rather than fashion. Her hair was braided and pinned up, ready for a day of work. You didn't have to do that, she said, watching him hammer the last nail into place. Preston shrugged. Least I could do for the shelter and meal. She nodded, then hesitated. I've got coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven, if you're hungry before you ride out. He should refuse. Every instinct built over years of self-preservation told him to saddle Rusty and ride away from this place, and this woman who had somehow made him feel more in one evening than he had in years. Instead, he heard himself say, that would be mighty welcome. The cabin's interior was small but meticulously kept. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair beside it. A table with 4 chairs stood in the center, a kerosene lamp hanging above it. A curtained alcove likely held a bed, and there were shelves of preserved foods and supplies along another wall. Everything spoke of care and determination. Sarah poured coffee into tin cups and set a plate of biscuits on the table. Help yourself to the preserves, she said, indicating a jar of what looked like blackberry jam. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence for a few minutes before Preston spoke. How long have you been running this place alone? Sarah's gaze flicked to a daguerreotype on the mantel, an older man with her same green eyes, standing proudly beside a younger Sarah. Pa took sick in the fall. By winter he was gone. That was 4 months ago. I'm sorry. It's the way of things out here. Her voice was matter of fact, but Preston detected the undercurrent of grief. We came out from Pennsylvania 6 years ago, built everything you see. Pa taught me every aspect of ranching, said a woman should be able to handle herself. He taught you well. A small smile touched her lips. Yes, he did. She sipped her coffee, then asked, What's in Oregon for you, Mr. Keller? Preston, he corrected automatically, and nothing specific, just somewhere new. Somewhere I can buy a small parcel, maybe raise horses. Somewhere no one knows me or what I've done, he didn't add. Sarah studied him over her cup, running to something or away from something. The directness of her question startled him. People on the frontier didn't pry. It was an unwritten rule born of the understanding that many came west to escape their pasts. Does it matter? I suppose not, just curious what drives a man to keep moving when others are trying so hard to build something lasting. Before Preston could respond, a sound outside caught their attention, hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching. Sarah was on her feet instantly, moving to the window with a grace that belied her alarm. 3 riders, she said, her voice tense, coming up the main trail. Preston joined her at the window, instinctively keeping to the side to avoid being silhouetted. 3 men on horseback were indeed approaching, rough-looking, trail-hardened men whose posture suggested they weren't just passing through. You expecting company? He asked quietly. Sarah shook her head, her expression grim. No, but I've been expecting trouble. She moved to fetch her Winchester from beside the door. There's a man named Victor Hadley who's been buying up all the small ranches in this valley, offers pennies on the dollar, and when folks refuse to sell, she let the implication hang in the air. And he wants your place. Sent his foreman by last month with an offer that was an insult. I told him Willow Creek wasn't for sale at any price. Her knuckles whitened on the rifle. Pa died defending this land. I won't dishonor his memory by giving it up. Preston's instinct for trouble, honed by years of survival, was screaming now. These weren't just cowhands paying a social call. He made a quick decision. Miss Gentry, Sarah, I think it would be best if I wasn't here when they arrive. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You think they'd assume that I'm someone you've hired for protection, yes. And if they're looking for a reason to cause trouble, finding a gun here would give them one. He moved quickly to gather his hat. I'll be close. If there's trouble, fire a shot in the air. Sarah nodded, her expression resolute despite the fear he could see beneath it. Thank you. Preston slipped out the back door and circled through the trees to position himself where he could observe the cabin without being seen. The 3 riders had reached the yard now and were dismounting. Their leader, a square-built man with a face like weathered leather, approached the porch with the confident stride of someone used to intimidation. The cabin door opened, and Sarah stood framed in the doorway, Winchester held casually but visibly in her hands. Preston couldn't hear their exchange clearly, but the tension was palpable even from a distance. After several minutes of what appeared to be increasingly heated conversation, the leader gestured angrily toward the pasture and the small herd of cattle visible in the distance. Sarah shook her head firmly. The man took a step toward her, and Preston's hand moved instinctively to his Colt, but Sarah stood her ground, the rifle now pointed more deliberately at the visitor. After a tense moment, the man backed down, spitting on the ground before returning to his horse. The 3 mounted up, but before riding away, the leader shouted something that carried clearly to Preston's position. 1 week, Gentry. Then we do this the hard way. Preston watched them ride away before emerging from his position and approaching the cabin. Sarah still stood on the porch, her face pale but determined. What did they want? He asked, though he already suspected. Hadley's final offer, she said bitterly, double what he offered before, which is still half what this place is worth. Says if I don't take it by next Saturday, he'll run his cattle through my grazing land and dam the creek that feeds my pasture. She looked out over the small, neat ranch, her expression a mixture of determination and despair. Without water and grazing, my cattle won't last a month. Preston studied the departing riders, memorizing their appearance. These tactics sound familiar. Hadley, he wouldn't happen to have connections in Wyoming territory, would he? Sarah glanced at him sharply. His brother runs a mining operation near Cheyenne. Why? Just confirming a suspicion. Preston had heard stories of the Hadley brothers and their methods for acquiring property. Victor wasn't the worst of them, but he was ruthless and connected. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. You know of them. It wasn't a question, but Preston nodded anyway, enough to know they usually get what they want. Not this time. The steel in her voice was unmistakable. This is my home. I'll defend it to my last breath if necessary. Preston looked at her, really looked at her, and saw beyond the beautiful face to the core of strength beneath. Here was someone fighting for something real, something worth protecting. The realization stirred something long dormant within him. Your Helena delivery, she said suddenly. When is it due? Preston hesitated. Tomorrow, but... Then you need to go. I've kept you too long already. She managed a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Keller, but this is my fight. Every instinct told Preston to mount up and ride away. This wasn't his problem, and getting involved would only lead to the kind of attachment he'd spent years avoiding. Yet he found himself unable to take that first step toward his horse. I could come back, he heard himself say. After the delivery, might be able to help you figure something out. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by wariness. Why would you do that? You don't know me. It was a fair question, one Preston wasn't sure he could answer. Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people stand alone against men like Hadley. Sarah studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read his intentions. Finally, she nodded. If you want to come back after your business in Helena, I won't turn away the help. An hour later, Preston rode away from Willow Creek Ranch, glancing back once to see Sarah standing on the porch, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the mountains. Something pulled at him, urging him to turn around, to stay and protect what she was building. But he had a job to finish, and commitments weren't made lightly on the frontier. He would complete his delivery, collect his pay, and then he would return to this hidden valley, and the woman whose courage had awakened something he thought long dead within him. The fort at Helena was a bustling center of military activity, with soldiers drilling in the yard and supply wagons coming and going through the gates. Preston delivered the string of horses as contracted, accepted his payment, and was preparing to leave when a familiar voice called his name. Keller, by God, is that you? Preston turned to see Major Daniel Walsh striding toward him, hand extended in greeting. They had served together briefly during the war, Walsh as a captain then, Preston as one of his scouts. Major, Preston acknowledged, shaking the offered hand. Didn't expect to find you in Montana territory. Walsh clapped him on the shoulder. Been here 2 years now. Come, have a drink in my quarters. I want to hear what you've been doing since Shiloh. Preston should have refused. He wanted to be on the trail back to Willow Creek before nightfall, but Walsh had been a good commander, one of the few officers who had treated the scouts with respect, and refusing would raise questions. In the privacy of Walsh's quarters, over whiskey that was better than anything Preston had tasted in years, they exchanged abbreviated versions of their lives since the war. Finally, Walsh leaned forward, his expression turning serious. You know, Keller, we could use a man with your skills here. The territory's expanding, more settlers coming in every month. We need reliable scouts who know the land and can handle themselves. Preston shook his head. Appreciate the offer, Major, but I'm not looking to put on a uniform again. Walsh nodded, unsurprised. Can't blame a man for trying. He studied Preston over the rim of his glass. So what is keeping you in these parts? Last I heard, you were heading for California. Preston hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. There's a small ranch south of here, owners having trouble with land grabbers. Let me guess, Victor Hadley. Walsh's expression darkened. You know him. Know of him, he's been systematically acquiring every piece of decent grazing land between here and the Wyoming line. Legal methods when possible, other means when necessary. Walsh refilled their glasses. Unfortunately, there's little the Army can do unless there's clear evidence of a crime. Preston absorbed this information, his concern deepening. What about the territorial marshal? Stretched thin and Hadley's careful, keeps his hands clean while his men do the dirty work. Walsh studied Preston's face. This ranch owner, they must be important for you to get involved. Preston didn't answer directly. What can you tell me about Hadley's operation, his men, his methods? Walsh seemed to consider for a moment before crossing to his desk and removing a folder. This isn't official army business, understand. But as one former soldier to another, he spread several documents on the table. These are reports of complaints against Hadley and his associates over the past year. Fences cut, water sources diverted, cattle scattered, barns burning under mysterious circumstances. Preston scanned the documents, his jaw tightening. The pattern was clear: systematic intimidation leading to forced sales. Any of these complaints stick. Not one. Witnesses disappear, evidence gets contaminated, or the victims simply give up and sell. Walsh gathered the papers. Hadley has about a dozen men working for him. His foreman, Ellis Brandt, is the one to watch. Former soldier turned mercenary, mean streak a mile wide. Preston committed the name to memory. Square-built, face like saddle leather. Walsh nodded. That's Brandt. If he's already visited your friend, the clock is ticking. Later, as Preston prepared to depart, Walsh handed him a small packet. Copies of those reports might be useful. He hesitated. Keller, be careful. Men like Hadley don't take kindly to interference. Preston tucked the packet into his saddlebags. Understood and thanks. One more thing, Walsh called as Preston mounted Rusty. If things go badly, fire 3 shots in quick succession. I'll have a patrol in the area starting tomorrow, unofficial of course. With a nod of gratitude, Preston rode out of the fort, his mind already mapping the fastest route back to Willow Creek Ranch. The sun was beginning its westward descent, casting long shadows across the trail. If he pushed hard, he could make it back by midnight. As he rode, Preston found his thoughts returning to Sarah, her determination, her courage, and the connection he'd felt despite his best efforts to remain detached. For years, he had convinced himself that the frontier was no place for attachment, that caring for others only created vulnerabilities that would eventually destroy you. Yet here he was, riding hard toward danger rather than away from it, all because of a woman he'd known for less than 2 days. The realization should have troubled him more than it did. The moon was high when Preston finally approached the hidden valley. He slowed Rusty to a walk, all senses alert for anything unusual. The night was quiet, too quiet. As they crested the final rise overlooking the ranch, Preston reined in sharply. Willow Creek Ranch lay dark and still below, no welcoming lamplight in the windows, no smoke from the chimney despite the chill night air. Even from this distance, something felt wrong. Preston dismounted and led Rusty off the trail, securing him in a stand of trees before proceeding on foot, his Colt drawn. He approached cautiously, using the shadows for cover, until he reached the edge of the yard. The cabin door hung partially open, swinging slightly in the night breeze. Preston's stomach tightened with foreboding as he moved forward in a crouch, gun ready. "Sarah," he called softly as he reached the porch. When no response came, he pushed the door open wider, revealing the cabin's interior dimly lit by moonlight through the windows. The inside of the cabin had been ransacked, furniture overturned, shelves emptied, the daguerreotype of Sarah and her father smashed on the floor. But no blood, Preston noted with relief. No sign of violence against a person, only property. "Sarah," he called again, louder this time, checking the curtained alcove and finding the bed empty, though disheveled. A sound from outside sent him into a defensive crouch beside the window. Listening intently, he identified the source, the soft nickering of a horse from the direction of the barn. Moving silently, Preston made his way across the yard. The barn door was closed but not latched. Preston eased it open just enough to slip inside, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the deeper darkness. Rusty's companion from before, the dappled mare, shifted nervously in her stall. "Easy girl," he murmured, and a gasp sounded from the hayloft above. "Who's there?" Sarah's voice, tense with fear but unmistakable. Relief flooded through Preston. "It's me." "Preston Keller." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of movement from above. Sarah appeared at the edge of the loft, a shotgun trained on him until recognition dawned. She lowered the weapon, her shoulders sagging. "Preston," she breathed, the single word containing a wealth of emotion. "You came back." "I said I would." He holstered his Colt. "What happened?" Sarah descended the ladder from the loft, moving stiffly as if sore. In the dim light filtering through the cracks in the barn walls, Preston could see her appearance was disheveled, her hair loose around her shoulders, dirt smudged on her face, and her dress torn at the sleeve. "Hadley's men came back this afternoon," she said, her voice steady despite the evidence of her ordeal. 6 of them this time, led by that same man Brant, said Hadley had reconsidered his offer. Wanted to give me one more chance to be reasonable. Preston's jaw tightened, and when you refused. They started by shooting 2 of my cattle, said they'd keep shooting until I signed the sale papers. Her voice caught slightly. When I still refused, they ransacked the cabin, looking for the deed and anything valuable. I managed to grab Pa's shotgun and the strongbox with my papers and escape to the barn. They didn't follow you. Sarah shook her head. Brant said they'd be back at dawn with more men, said, she swallowed hard, said Hadley had ways of making stubborn women change their minds. The implication was clear, and rage flared hot in Preston's chest. Are you hurt? Just bruises, I'm all right. She straightened her shoulders, though Preston could see the effort it took. But I can't stop them, not alone, there's too many. Preston made a quick decision. We need to leave now. Gather whatever you can't bear to lose. We'll ride to Helena. No, the word was firm, absolute. This is my home. Pa and I built it from nothing. His bones are buried on that ridge. She pointed toward a small rise visible through the barn door. I won't be driven off. Sarah, be reasonable. Hadley has too many men. Then help me fight, she interrupted, her green eyes flashing with determination in the moonlight. You came back for a reason, Preston. Was it just to tell me to give up? The question struck him like a physical blow. He had come back, driven by something he couldn't or wouldn't name, and now he stood at a crossroads. Walk away and preserve the isolation that had defined his life for years, or stand with this remarkable woman against overwhelming odds. Looking at her, fierce and unbowed despite everything, Preston knew there was only one choice he could live with. No, he said finally, not to tell you to give up, but we need a plan better than just waiting for them to return. Relief flickered across her face, followed by renewed determination. What did you learn in Helena? Preston quickly shared what Major Walsh had told him about Hadley's operation and tactics, including the possibility of military intervention if things turned desperate. As he spoke, Sarah's expression shifted from despair to calculating resolve. So Hadley's careful about keeping his hands clean, she mused. That's why they ransacked the cabin instead of burning it, no clear crime they could be charged with. Preston nodded. Exactly, and why they'll try to intimidate you into signing the sale papers voluntarily. Sarah paced the length of the barn, thinking, then we need to turn their tactics against them. Force them to commit an act the law can't ignore. That's dangerous, Preston warned. These aren't men who will hesitate to kill if cornered. I know, she stopped pacing and faced him, but what choice do we have? I won't sell and they won't stop. Eventually, they'll kill me and forge my signature on the deed anyway. The brutal truth of her assessment hung in the air between them. Preston knew she was right. Men like Hadley didn't leave loose ends, and Sarah had become exactly that. All right, he conceded, but we do this carefully. Your life is worth more than this land, no matter how much you love it. Something flickered in Sarah's eyes at his words, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. Thank you, she said softly, for coming back, for not telling me I'm foolish to fight. There's nothing foolish about defending what's yours. Preston removed his hat, running a hand through his hair as he thought. We have until dawn to prepare. Let's make the most of it. Through the remaining hours of darkness, they worked quickly and quietly. Preston helped Sarah move her most valued possessions, her father's Bible, her mother's jewelry, important documents, to a hiding place in a hollow tree a quarter-mile from the cabin. They then prepared the property as best they could for the coming confrontation. Hadley's men will expect you to be alone and frightened, Preston explained as they worked. We'll use that expectation against them. They set trip wires across the main approach to the cabin, arranged barrels to provide cover, and positioned weapons at strategic points. Preston showed Sarah how to create the impression of multiple defenders by moving between positions. As they worked, a strange intimacy grew between them, the kind that comes from shared purpose and danger. Preston found himself watching Sarah when she wasn't looking, impressed by her quick mind and unwavering courage. For her part, Sarah seemed to draw strength from his presence, her initial wariness giving way to trust. As dawn approached, they made final preparations in the cabin. Preston had outlined his plan, and though Sarah had initially objected to parts of it, she eventually agreed it offered their best chance. Remember, Preston said, checking his Colt one final time, the goal isn't to win a gunfight. It's to create a situation where Hadley's actions can't be ignored by the law. Sarah nodded, her expression solemn. She had changed into a fresh dress, a practical garment of deep blue that nonetheless highlighted the gold of her hair and the green of her eyes. Preston found himself momentarily distracted by how beautiful she looked, even on the edge of danger. "You should hide now," she said, breaking into his thoughts. "They'll be here soon." Preston hesitated, then did something that surprised them both. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Be careful. If things go wrong." "They won't," she interrupted, but she didn't pull her hand away. For a moment they stood connected, something unspoken passing between them. Then Preston released her hand and moved to his hiding place in the root cellar, accessible through a trapdoor beneath the kitchen table. Sarah repositioned the table over the trapdoor once he was concealed, then took her position by the window, shotgun ready, but hidden from view. They didn't have long to wait. As the first rays of sun crested the eastern hills, the sound of approaching horsemen broke the morning stillness. Sarah tensed, her fingers tightening on the shotgun. "Showtime," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. The riders came into view, 8 men this time, led by Ellis Brant. They approached confidently, spreading out as they neared the cabin. Brant dismounted first, adjusting his gun belt as he strode toward the porch. "Miss Gentry," he called, his voice carrying the false politeness of a predator toying with prey. "I hope you've reconsidered Mr. Hadley's generous offer." Sarah moved to the door, keeping the shotgun hidden behind its bulk as she opened it. "Mr. Brant," she acknowledged coldly, "I told you yesterday Willow Creek isn't for sale." Brant's facade of politeness slipped. "I don't think you understand your situation, Miss Gentry. You're alone out here. No one's coming to help you." "I understand perfectly," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "This is my land. You have no right to be here." Brant's smile turned ugly. "Rights? Out here, the only rights that matter belong to those with the strength to claim them." He gestured to his men. "Look around you. There are 8 of us and 1 of you. Be sensible." "And if I'm not?" Sarah challenged. "Then things get unpleasant." Brant's hand moved to his gun. "Hadley wants this land, one way or another. The easy way, you walk away with money in your pocket. The hard way." He let the threat hang unfinished. Sarah's chin lifted defiantly. "My father didn't raise me to bow to bullies." Brant's expression darkened. "Your father's dead, girl, and you'll join him unless you sign these papers." He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. "Last chance." "The answer is no." Sarah's voice rang clear in the morning air. "Now get off my land." With a nod from Brant, 2 of his men dismounted and started toward the cabin. Sarah raised the shotgun, aiming it squarely at Brant's chest. "That's close enough," she warned. The men hesitated, looking to Brant for direction. He laughed, the sound cold and confident. "You think that scares us? Even if you get 1 shot off, the rest of us will cut you down before you can reload." He gestured again to his men. "Take her." The men resumed their approach, and Sarah backed into the cabin, shotgun still raised. As planned, she let them follow her inside, Brant close behind them. "Search the place," Brant ordered. "Find the deed and any other papers." To Sarah, he added, "Put the shotgun down, Miss Gentry. No need for anyone to get hurt." Sarah held the weapon steady. "I told you to leave." One of the men lunged suddenly, grabbing for the shotgun. Sarah let him take it, exactly as she and Preston had discussed. The man grinned triumphantly, thinking he'd disarmed her. "Not so brave now, are you?" Brant taunted, advancing on Sarah. She backed away until she stood beside the kitchen table. "I'm giving you one last warning. Leave now." Brant laughed again, reaching for her. "Or what?" The trapdoor beneath the table burst open, and Preston emerged like an avenging spirit, Colt drawn. "Or deal with me," he said, his voice deadly calm. Brant's reaction was instantaneous, his hand dropping to his gun. But Preston was faster, years of survival having honed his reflexes to a lethal edge. His first shot caught Brant in the shoulder, spinning him around. His second disarmed one of the other men, the bullet striking the hand that held a revolver. "Next one won't be so considerate," Preston warned, his gun unwavering. "Drop your weapons, all of you." The remaining man in the cabin complied, clearly stunned by the unexpected resistance. Outside, the other riders had drawn their guns at the sound of shots but held position, uncertain what was happening inside. "You're dead, Keller," Brant growled, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Hadley will." Hadley will what? Preston interrupted. Send more men, burn the ranch, kill us both, go ahead and try, but first you're going to do something for us. Sarah moved to Preston's side, retrieving her shotgun from the surprised henchman. You're going to sign a confession, Mr. Brant, detailing exactly how Victor Hadley has been terrorizing ranchers throughout this territory. Brant's laugh was pained but defiant. You're insane, I'll sign nothing. Your choice, Preston said evenly. But Major Walsh at the Helena fort is very interested in Hadley's operations. The army patrol he's sending should arrive by noon. This last part was a bluff. Walsh had promised assistance only if things went badly, but Brant didn't need to know that. At the mention of the army, uncertainty flickered across Brant's face. You're bluffing. Maybe, Preston shrugged, but consider this, Hadley's been careful to keep his hands clean. He'd sacrifice you in a heartbeat to save himself. If the army starts investigating, who do you think he'll blame for all those burned barns and poisoned wells? The calculation was visible in Brant's eyes. Preston pressed his advantage. You're wounded, you've got men down. Even if you somehow win this fight, you'll have casualties Hadley will need to explain. He lowered his voice. Or you can leave now, with a chance to get clear before this all comes crashing down. Sarah stepped forward. Tell Hadley Willow Creek Ranch is not for sale. Not today, not ever. And if he sends more men, they'll face more than just us. They'll face the United States Army and the Territorial Marshal. For a long, tense moment, Brant stared at them, hatred burning in his eyes. Then slowly he nodded. We're leaving, but this isn't over. Yes, Preston said firmly, it is. Under the watchful eyes of Preston and Sarah, Brant and his men backed out of the cabin, collected their injured and mounted up. Before riding away, Brant turned in his saddle. Hadley won't forget this, he called, his voice carrying a promise of future retribution. Neither will we, Sarah replied, standing tall beside Preston on the porch, shotgun in hand. They watched in silence as the riders disappeared down the trail, tension slowly ebbing from their bodies as the immediate danger passed. They'll be back, Sarah said quietly. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but they'll come. Preston nodded, his mind already working on the next steps. Yes, but not before we've made our move. We need to ride to Helena today, bring Walsh the evidence we have, and make formal complaints against Hadley. Sarah turned to him, studying his face. Wait. The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond this immediate crisis. Preston realized with sudden clarity that somewhere in the past 2 days, everything had changed. The careful isolation he had maintained for years had cracked, and through those cracks, something new and fragile had begun to grow. Yes, he said softly, if you'll have my help. Something in Sarah's expression softened, the warrior's resolve giving way momentarily to reveal the woman beneath. I would, she said, very much. The ride to Helena took most of the day, during which Preston and Sarah spoke little, both processing the events of the morning and the subtle shift in their relationship. Major Walsh received them immediately, his eyebrows rising at the sight of Sarah, composed and determined despite her ordeal. Miss Gentry, Walsh greeted her, Preston told me of your situation, but he failed to mention your remarkable courage. Sarah smiled slightly. Mr. Keller seems to prefer understatement, Major. Walsh laughed, then grew serious, as they laid out their evidence against Hadley and his men. The reports Preston had brought back, combined with Sarah's testimony and the accounts of other ranchers Walsh had quietly collected, painted a damning picture. Enough to warrant an official investigation, Walsh concluded. The territorial governor has been looking for an excuse to move against Hadley for months. This might be exactly what he needs. What about Willow Creek in the meantime? Sarah asked. Hadley won't simply give up. Walsh considered this. I can assign a patrol to your area for the next few weeks, officially to monitor Indian activity, of course, and I'll send word to the marshal's office today. He glanced between Preston and Sarah. But I'd advise caution until this is resolved. They left the fort with mixed emotions, hope that justice might finally catch up to Hadley, tempered by the knowledge that danger still lurked on the horizon. The sun was setting as they started back toward Willow Creek. We should make camp, Preston suggested as twilight deepened around them. Continue in the morning. Sarah agreed, and they found a suitable spot near a small stream. As Preston built a fire, Sarah arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames. The domestic simplicity of the task struck Preston suddenly, how natural it felt to share this space with her, to work together in comfortable silence. Later, as they sat beside the fire eating a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Sarah broke the contemplative quiet. "What will you do after this is settled?" The question caught Preston off guard. He had been so focused on the immediate crisis that he hadn't considered what would come after. His original plan to continue to Oregon seemed distant now, like a path glimpsed in a dream. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "What about you?" "Stay at Willow Creek, rebuild what was damaged, keep my father's dream alive." She poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. "It won't be easy alone." The opening was clear, but Preston hesitated, years of self-imposed isolation making him cautious. "You've proven you're capable of handling more than most." Sarah looked up at him, firelight dancing in her green eyes. "Capable, yes. But that doesn't mean I want to do it alone forever." She held his gaze steadily. "There's a difference between surviving and living, Preston. I think you know that as well as I do." The truth of her words resonated deep within him, touching the emptiness he had carried for so long. For years, he had convinced himself that attachment was weakness, that caring for others only created vulnerabilities that would eventually destroy you. Yet sitting across from this remarkable woman, he began to see how that belief had become the very prison he was trying to avoid. "I used to believe the frontier was no place for connection," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "That out here, a man survives by depending on no one but himself." "And now," Sarah prompted gently when he fell silent. Preston looked at her, truly looked at her, taking in the strength and beauty that had captivated him from the first moment on her porch. "Now I'm not so sure." Sarah smiled, the expression warming her face and sending an answering warmth through Preston's chest. "Good," she said simply, "because I think you're wrong." They held each other's gaze across the fire, something unspoken but profound passing between them. Then Sarah yawned, breaking the moment. "We should rest," Preston said, though rest was the last thing on his mind. "Long ride tomorrow." Sarah nodded, settling into her bedroll. "Good night, Preston." "Good night, Sarah." Sleep came slowly for Preston, his mind filled with thoughts of green eyes and honey-blonde hair, of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and of the possibility, terrifying and exhilarating, that his solitary path might be coming to an end. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the fire reduced to embers. Preston woke first, watching the soft light of dawn play across Sarah's sleeping face. In repose, the determination that usually marked her features gave way to a gentler aspect, reminding him of her youth and the weight she carried. Sarah stirred, her eyes opening to find Preston watching her. A slight blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Morning," she said, her voice soft with sleep. "Morning," he replied, suddenly self-conscious. "I'll get coffee started." They broke camp efficiently and were on the trail within the hour, riding side by side through the Montana wilderness. The tension that had hung between them the previous evening had transformed into something different, a comfortable awareness, punctuated by glances and small smiles. As they approached Willow Creek, Preston found himself studying the land with new eyes, seeing not just a hidden ranch but a home built with determination and love. The cabin with its sturdy walls, the barn where Sarah had waited through the night, the small garden beginning to sprout behind the house, all of it representing years of work and dreams. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Preston allowed himself to imagine being part of something like this, something permanent and meaningful. They were still a mile from the ranch when they spotted the smoke. Sarah saw it first, her sharp intake of breath drawing Preston's attention to the dark plume rising above the trees. Without a word, they spurred their horses into a gallop, fear propelling them forward. As they crested the final rise overlooking the ranch, the devastation came into full view. The barn was engulfed in flames, black smoke billowing into the clear blue sky. The cabin's windows were shattered, its door hanging from broken hinges. In the pasture, several cattle lay motionless, dark stains spreading beneath them. "No," Sarah whispered, the single word filled with anguish. "No, no, no." She urged her mare forward, but Preston reached out to grab her reins. "Wait," he cautioned, his eyes scanning the scene for movement. "It could be a trap." Sarah struggled briefly against his restraint before reason prevailed. She nodded, her face pale with shock and rage. "Hadley," she said, the name a curse on her lips. "He didn't even wait a day." Preston studied the destruction, noting details with the practiced eye of a scout. The fire's been burning for hours, he observed. They're long gone. Still cautious, they approached the ranch. The barn was beyond saving, its timbers collapsing in a shower of sparks as they watched. The cabin had been ransacked again, more thoroughly this time, furniture smashed and Sarah's few possessions scattered. A piece of paper had been nailed to what remained of the door. Preston removed it carefully, reading the message written in a bold hand. Next time it won't be just buildings that burn, sell or die. He handed it silently to Sarah, whose eyes hardened as she read the threat. For a long moment she stood absolutely still, surveying the destruction of her home. Then with deliberate movements she crumpled the paper and let it fall to the ground. "Help me salvage what we can," she said, her voice flat with contained emotion. They worked through the afternoon, extinguishing what remained of the barn fire, gathering scattered tools and household items, and burying the slaughtered cattle. Sarah moved with mechanical efficiency, her face a mask of determined control. Only once, when they found the shattered remains of her father's Bible, did she allow herself a moment of visible grief. A single tear quickly brushed away. As sunset approached, they sat on the porch steps of the damaged cabin, exhaustion etched in their faces and bodies. Sarah stared out at the smoking ruins of the barn, her expression unreadable. "We'll go back to Helena tomorrow," Preston said quietly. "Show Walsh what they've done." Sarah nodded, but there was a resignation in her posture that concerned him. "It won't matter," she said. "Not in time. Hadley will keep coming until he gets what he wants or until I'm dead." She turned to Preston, her green eyes dulled with weariness and grief. "Maybe I should just start over somewhere else." The defeat in her voice cut through Preston like a knife. This woman, who had stood against armed men with nothing but courage and determination, was considering surrender. And he understood why. The weight of fighting alone was crushing, even for someone as strong as Sarah. "No," he said firmly, "that's exactly what Hadley wants, to break you, to make you feel hopeless." "Look around, Preston," she gestured to the destruction surrounding them. "Haven't they already succeeded?" Preston took her hand, surprising them both with the gesture. "Buildings can be rebuilt, land can be restored. What matters is that you're alive, and as long as you're alive, Willow Creek has a future." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. "Why do you care so much? 3 days ago, you didn't even know this place existed." The question hung between them, demanding an answer Preston had been avoiding even in his own thoughts. Why did he care? Why had this woman and this hidden valley captured him so completely in such a short time? "Because when I rode into this valley," he said slowly, finding the truth as he spoke it, "I wasn't looking for anything except shelter from a storm. But I found something I'd stopped believing existed, someone who fights for what matters, who builds rather than destroys, who sees beauty and possibility where others see only isolation." He tightened his grip on her hand. "You reminded me that there's more to life than just surviving from one day to the next." Sarah's eyes widened at his words, surprise and something warmer blooming in their green depths. "Preston," she whispered, his name a question and an acknowledgement. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. They both stood quickly, hands moving to their weapons, but relaxed when they recognized the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers. A patrol of 6 men rode into the yard, led by a Sergeant Preston recognized from the fort. They surveyed the destruction with professional interest, the sergeant dismounting to approach the porch. "Miss Gentry, Major Walsh sent us to check on your situation." His eyes took in the damaged cabin and smoldering barn. "Seems we're a bit late." "Just a bit," Sarah agreed dryly. The sergeant nodded to Preston. "Major also sent this." He handed over a sealed envelope, said it was urgent. Preston opened it, reading quickly, his expression changing from concentration to satisfaction. "Hadley's been arrested," he announced. "The territorial marshal took him in this morning on charges of conspiracy, intimidation, and land fraud. They found papers in his office linking him to similar operations in Wyoming and Dakota territories." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Arrested already? Apparently your situation wasn't the only one Walsh was investigating. Your testimony was just the final piece he needed." Preston handed her the letter. "Brandt and several others were arrested too, but 3 of Hadley's men are still unaccounted for." "The ones who did this," Sarah guessed, glancing at the destruction around them. "Most likely." Preston turned to the sergeant. "Can you leave a couple of men here tonight, just in case?" The sergeant nodded. Those were our orders. 2 men will remain until relieved tomorrow. He gestured to the damaged cabin. Will you be staying here, miss, or would you prefer escort to Helena? Sarah straightened her shoulders, determination returning to her posture. This is my home, Sergeant, I'm staying. The soldiers set up camp near the cabin, their presence providing a security that allowed Preston and Sarah to truly rest for the first time in days. As night fell, they sat inside the cabin, damaged but still structurally sound, a small fire burning in the hearth. It'll take weeks to rebuild the barn, Sarah said, her practical nature already planning the recovery. And the garden is destroyed, I'll need to replant. Preston watched her, marveling at her resilience. Where others would see only devastation, she saw work to be done, a future to be rebuilt. You'll manage, he said confidently. You're stronger than Hadley could ever understand. Sarah smiled slightly, the expression tired but genuine. Not alone, I'm not, she looked at him directly. Will you stay, Preston, at least until things are stable again? The question seemed simple on the surface, but both knew it carried deeper implications. Preston considered his response carefully, aware that his answer would change the course of both their lives. What if I stayed longer than that? He asked quietly. What if I didn't leave at all? Sarah's breath caught, her eyes searching his face. Is that what you want? Preston moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. 3 days ago, I was a drifter with no home and no connections, convinced that was the only way to survive out here. Then I stumbled into this valley and found you. He smiled, the expression softening his usually guarded features, and I realized I've been surviving, but not living. What are you saying? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, hope and uncertainty mingling in her eyes. I'm saying I want to help you rebuild Willow Creek. I'm saying I want to put down roots for the first time in years. He reached up to touch her cheek gently. I'm saying I've found something worth staying for. The last of Sarah's carefully maintained composure crumbled at his words. Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of relief and joy rather than sorrow. I was so afraid you'd leave, she admitted, that once the danger passed, you'd continue to Oregon and I'd never see you again. Oregon can wait, Preston said simply. You are what matters now. In the flickering light of the fire, with the ruins of her ranch surrounding them and an uncertain future ahead, Sarah Gentry leaned forward and pressed her lips to Preston Keller's. The kiss was gentle at first, a question and an answer in one gesture, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Sarah rested her forehead against his. Stay, she whispered. Help me build something lasting. I will, Preston promised, and for the first time in years, the words felt not like a burden but like a liberation. For as long as you'll have me. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. With Hadley and his main lieutenants in custody awaiting trial, the threat that had hung over Willow Creek diminished, though it didn't disappear entirely. The 3 missing henchmen were never found, having presumably fled the territory once their employer was arrested. Major Walsh arranged for additional lumber to be delivered from the fort's supplies, a gesture of goodwill that accelerated the rebuilding process. Preston threw himself into the work with unexpected enthusiasm, finding satisfaction in creating rather than destroying for the first time in years. Sarah was a constant source of amazement to him, her knowledge of ranching, her unwavering determination, and her capacity for joy despite all she had endured. Each day, as they worked side by side rebuilding the barn or mending fences, Preston found himself falling deeper under her spell. For her part, Sarah watched the transformation in the quiet, guarded man who had stumbled into her life during a storm. The tension that had marked him began to ease, replaced by a quiet contentment that occasionally burst into full-throated laughter. She treasured these moments, storing them away like precious gems. One evening, as they sat on the newly repaired porch watching the sunset paint the valley in golds and purples, Sarah broke a comfortable silence. I received a letter from the Territorial Land Office today, she said. Hadley's case is proceeding, and they've formally acknowledged my clear title to Willow Creek. Preston smiled, squeezing her hand. That's excellent news. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. It made me think about the future, about what happens next. What do you mean? Preston asked, sensing there was more behind her words. This ranch, it's more than just a piece of land to me. It's everything my father and I dreamed of. She turned to face him fully. But dreams change and grow. What I want now is different from what I wanted when you first rode into this valley." Preston studied her face, trying to read the emotions there. "What do you want now, Sarah?" "A partner," she said simply, "not just someone to help with the work, but someone to share it all with, the struggles and the joys, the failures and the triumphs." She took a deep breath. "I want you, Preston. Not as a hired hand or a temporary ally, but as a true partner in everything." Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. "Are you proposing to me, Sarah Gentry?" he asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sarah laughed, the sound bright in the gathering dusk. "I suppose I am. Is that terribly forward of me?" Preston reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that caught the last rays of sunlight. "Actually, I've been carrying this for a week, waiting for the right moment." He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold band. "I rode to Helena while you were visiting the Thompsons' place. Had this made by the jeweler there." Sarah stared at the ring, then at Preston's face, wonder replacing amusement in her expression. "You were going to ask me." "Tonight, actually," he chuckled softly. "You beat me to it." "Ask me anyway," she whispered. "I want to hear the words." Preston took her hand, his expression growing serious. "Sarah Gentry, when I rode into this valley, I was a man without a home or a future, just surviving from one day to the next. You showed me there could be more, that even in this harsh land there could be beauty and purpose and love." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me? Will you make Willow Creek our home, not just yours or mine, but ours?" Tears spilled from Sarah's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Preston Keller." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that spoke of all the loneliness they had both endured and the future they would build together. As the last light faded from the sky, they remained on the porch of the cabin they had defended and rebuilt together, two souls who had found in each other what the frontier so often denied, not just survival, but a chance to truly live. 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day with the aspen leaves turning gold against the blue Montana sky, Preston Keller and Sarah Gentry were married in the newly rebuilt barn of Willow Creek Ranch. Major Walsh, now a friend as well as ally, performed the ceremony, while settlers from neighboring ranches gathered to witness the union and celebrate the defeat of Victor Hadley, whose conviction had brought a new sense of security to the small ranchers of the territory. After the celebration ended and the guests departed, Preston carried Sarah across the threshold of their cabin, now expanded with a new room and furnished with pieces they had selected together in Helena. As he set her down, Sarah looked around at the home they had created from the ashes of destruction, her eyes bright with happiness. "Who would have thought," she mused, "that a chance storm would bring me the love of my life?" Preston pulled her close, still amazed that this remarkable woman had chosen him, had seen beyond the hardened drifter to the man beneath. "I think I was always riding toward you," he said softly. "I just didn't know it until I found this valley." Outside their window, the land that had once represented Sarah's solitary struggle now stretched before them as the foundation of their shared future. Willow Creek Ranch, no longer hidden, but home.